media organizations. Please join me in welcoming Stan.
All right. Thanks for being here. I know it's the first time I came over here earlier. It was kind of hard to find, so thanks for finding me. So I'm a senior data engineer at the LA Times. I've been with the LA Times for about 2 years now. Our team has been pretty small. Actually, one of our former team members is here. We are mainly focused on turning a legacy organization, a newspaper, into kind of a modern tech company. And there's kind of a lot of challenges there. So I'm a technologist, programmer, lifelong hacker, and my talk's pretty general, so it's kind of about everything that's going on in the industry, where I see current trends are going, and kind of my challenges day to day. So also a little aside, I was at DEF CON last week. If any of you guys are into security, I recommend going to this convention. Super cool, hacked a Tesla, hacked a lot of casino infrastructure, super cool. So also, just another side, don't do this. If any of you guys use AWS, don't make your S3 buckets public. Otherwise, I'll download it and do something fun with it. So I kind of have like 3 different tracks here. There's a lot of different people. There's leaders of companies, management, engineers here. Maybe you're not in the data space but want to get into it. Maybe you're on the product side. And there's kind of a lot going on. Everyone has a lot of decisions to make in different companies. Who to hire, how to build your team, what culture to set. And then as an individual engineer, you have a lot of choices in your career. What company should you work for? Who should you connect with? What kind of tools should you learn? I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of different tools out there. What should you be focusing your time on? And then on the product side, if you're working in product development or you want to get into it, how do you help your company? How do you make it better? That sort of thing. So those are kind of my 3 different parallel tracks, and hopefully at the end of the talk you'll get something in this realm out of it. So my overarching theme on this is that you can't do everything yourself. The most important thing that we all have is that we have to work together in teams. And teams are super important. And I can't think of the number of times that I've had detailed conversations with someone in the industry who just really dislikes their boss, really dislikes something really minor about their company. So the more as leaders we can spend a lot of time thinking about what culture we set, what's important, how we treat our employees, I think that's super important. And I love the show. By the way, they filmed this in our old LA Times building. Super funny. So on the hiring front, if there's anyone here that's like a leader, or maybe you're just a data engineer or data scientist, this is your typical LinkedIn inbox, right? I never respond to any of these, so if there's anyone here that's a recruiter, don't do this. Maybe you should come here. Hopefully you're here. So I want to talk like on the team thing, what's super important. I see a lot of times in different teams, there's a kind of wrong emphasis on kind of focusing on the problems, right? The thing about most engineers and most super smart people is that they're not motivated by money. They're motivated by upward mobility, their ability to learn, who their colleagues are. So one thing about our company that I really value is that our mission is super valuable, right? In this kind of fractured digital age with companies like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Netflix, and Google, they're all converging on optimizing towards dollars. And really how our company operates is that we just want to inform people, we want to engage people, and we want to empower people. And then on the hiring side, or even on the sort of career development side, like all these companies can offer these big salaries, but for companies where you're really mission driven, you have to focus on what makes you different. So this is kind of just a general thing for anyone here who's looking for a new job. This is sort of the breakdown of data science salaries and data science employers within the US. You'll see the majority of them are much larger companies, but I think, in my opinion, the greatest companies to work with are kind of everything in the lower quadrant. So pretty much everything where you can make a big impact in the company super early on. And this is kind of a general overview of the like sort of job responsibilities that a typical person in a data team does. I like to notice this one here, ETL. It's probably the shortest one. It's probably 50 to 60% of my time, just because the kind of unsexy work in most companies is really the glue between all the different providers in companies, whether it's analytics or data science or cloud computing. The bread and butter tends to be the how you solve problems. So why should you care about data and data science? I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but you have to guide critical decisions. It helps deepen your knowledge of your business. I think the more that you understand about your business, the better you are motivated to kind of build off of that. And then you can improve pretty much everything about your business. So you want to measure all of your things: customer, web traffic, finance. Data is measurement. And I think something that really gets missed often from data scientists and data engineers is that data really is an abstraction of something that you're trying to measure. So I think in all of the work that we do, the most important thing is to be mindful of what those measurements are, what they represent, what those abstractions are, because there's a lot of noise there. And I think data scientists often fall into the critical pitfall of thinking that data is the truth. But data is a representation of the truth. So you're a data scientist, you might start off kind of diving into, modeling your data problems, and no, don't do that. The reason I say that is the scientific method kind of underlies everything that a data scientist should do, especially in their career and in the real world. And really all that comes down to is, posing your question, sorting through the data, exploring it, spending a lot of time understanding it, and then being able to draw conclusions about it. And then I think the often lost portion is, how do you convey all this information, whether it's to your company, maybe it's to the public. It's important to spend a lot of time on that because you might put together all these great data science models. You might put together really interesting insights into the world or into different industries, but really kind of comes down to how you can integrate it within your product or integrate it within whatever your goal is. Maybe it's storytelling through data. Maybe you want to solve, I saw a talk earlier about the opioid crisis. So the other part of it is make the bosses care. I've seen over the past 5 years in my career that if you don't really make your bosses care about what you do, your input kind of amounts to nothing. And I think at the end of the day, you want to feel like you're really motivated by your work. So focus on the things that matter. Probably the biggest one here that's relevant to me is, how many subscribers does the LA Times need to be profitable? And how do we go there? And then, here's another one. Left unchecked, American student loan debt will bankrupt our future. So what do we do about these things? And why it's easier than ever, there's tons of open source projects. I encourage everyone in here, even if you're like a new software engineer, all these different frameworks are built by like honestly 1 or 2 people. There's so many critical pieces of infrastructure, especially on the internet, that surprisingly are built by these small groups of people, and you can contribute. You can write your own code, and we're kind of standing on a lot of important infrastructure, so it's kind of nice to be mindful of that. A typical data stack has kind of a lot of different pieces. There's a presentation layer, infrastructure layer, workflow, and storage. And this is kind of everything that I've done in my career and everything that we work on at the LA Times. There's data lakes, data warehouses. A lot of people use them interchangeably. I think it's important to delineate the difference between the two. There's raw data, and then there's data that you've really cleaned up that's ready to go. There's lots of different tools here: data lakes, data warehouses, distributed runners, visualization tools, web services, data science models, right? It's overwhelming. There's so many different things. So just take it in. There's a lot here. And this is like, I think any typical company has at least one tool in a lot of these spaces. So, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. But don't get distracted by shiny things. There's some new crazy tool. I say this especially to people in here that are starting companies or maybe building something new. It's kind of easy to get distracted by learning some new tool or focusing on some new crazy thing. You have to think of like, what is the actual thing that you're trying to solve? So there's things like blockchain, augmented reality, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. These are all the buzzwords, right? But like in reality, they're often like this. There's like a stupid thing to reset your router. We're going to use AI to like input form data, the hot dog, not hot dog thing. Your boss doesn't understand blockchain. So I want to focus on, there's another really good talk called, that's pretty funny. There's another great talk, I can't remember the name of it. It's about, but the main concept is around choosing boring technology. So sometimes it's not always the coolest thing to learn, but you want to focus on like what you actually deliver in values, right? The example here is you've got 3 tokens, right? And that's all of the tokens that you can spend. Think about your company as an economy, right? Once you spend those tokens, you're out of money. You ran out of VC money. Your publicly traded companies bankrupt, right? You want to solve whatever the problem it is. So you don't want to spend 2 tokens learning some new programming language that doesn't have the tools that you want to work with or doesn't have, an impact to your actual company. So there's a lot of underhyped tech in the industry. I think that's operations, right? I've seen, actually right here in LA, an amazing augmented reality company that was building some of the coolest stuff I've ever seen. But when their product launched on day 1, their site crashed. Their iOS app crashed. They got thousands of bad reviews on their iOS app, their Google app. And then overnight, they pissed off the vendor that they had built this whole augmented reality experience for, and they lost that client. And then 2 years later, the company basically is bankrupt. So you have to focus on a lot of things like web scalability and sort of the like boring stuff that if you're building a product, like nobody cares if they can't get to your cool thing. And then the other thing is just documentation. I know I'm probably speaking to a lot of more academic folks who are probably better than the average software engineer, but I can't count the number of times come into a company and you inherit some nasty database that you have no idea what's in it. You inherit some code that you have no idea what it does, but your boss tells you it's like this is the critical part of the company. And it's this 1,000-line block of code that you can't understand. You know, it's like a Ruby on Rails app with like 100 models that all point to each other, like a terrible database, but like, you know, it makes hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. So it's a smart guy, figure it out. So I will say to each and every one of you, on my behalf, spend a couple hours on whatever project you're working on, maybe even before you start it, and just write out some documentation. And then on the sort of more product side, like obsessively focus on whatever your product is. If it's, you know, if it's your data science model, if it's your big new approach to student loan debt, focus on it. And then this is another one. I hear this a lot in the industry. Google's using this, you know, cool new thing called Kubernetes. Let's use it for our company. No, you're like 3 people working on this problem that's totally unrelated to like scalable web infrastructure. You don't need Kubernetes. Like, oh, Uber's using this cool new tool. Like, no, don't do that. So I've got like a few interesting kind of case studies in my career. One of them was around kind of managing employees, right? Google has this, I'm actually not sure if they still have the system. They have this thing called OKRs, which is sort of a like employee review system, right? I worked for a company that was like, oh, Google does this, let's implement this at our company, while ignoring that like Google is a very different company. They have literally, they can employ tens of people to like implement this system and like spend a lot of time on it, and like we were a very small startup that didn't need this system. Or, you know, using languages or databases for the complete wrong use case, like, oh, this is super cool, let's use Cassandra, but oh, this is a chat bot that services like 50 people. This is the complete wrong thing. Or, I mean, this is one that I think a couple people in this room have seen, but like hiring data scientists too early before any of the infrastructure exists. Or maybe you've got all these highly paid data scientists and engineers, but they don't have support. So focus on whatever matters for your business. And then here's another thing. The mythical unicorn that I see people trying to hire for, you know, someone who's like, I want someone who's an amazing software engineer. They're like a data scientist who understands like convolutional neural networks and all of this, and like is a DevOps master and knows Google Cloud and knows Amazon Web Services. Like, no, the whole thing is that you need a team of people. They may have complementary different skills. So especially, I would say, you know, if you're an individual contributor, push back on your boss, push back on your employer, or if you're someone in here that's making those hiring decisions, maybe think about the fact that like you need a team that like balances a lot of these different skills. So I kind of wanted to go into a bunch of different tools, kind of go into the kind of goods and bads of a lot of them. Kind of there's the bottom level of any data stack storage, right? So there's relational databases, graph databases, NoSQL, and big data, right? So for anyone here that's wanting to learn a new tech, whatever it is that you're interested in, I would say focus on that, right? If you're super into embedded hardware, you want to build super cool wearables or whatever, probably learning big data is a waste of your time, or vice versa, right? You're super interested in web scalable infrastructure. You want to work for Google. You want to work, you want to build the next, self-driving car company. You know, you probably don't want to learn Oracle or whatever. Then presentation side, I think a lot of you guys are probably familiar with these tools, but big one I use at work a lot is called Tableau. It's a great thing to learn, especially for any kind of anyone who's sort of moving into the actual production and industry side of data science, because most companies I've worked for use that tool. Also, R is a big one, popular among a lot of data scientists. I will say about R that I'm a DevOps guy, so I hate R in production. So I prefer Python libraries. And then there's also a lot of cool open source tools. D3 Observable is a super cool one. Anyone here is data scientists, I urge you to check it out. It's like Jupyter Notebooks, kind of on steroids. It's gotten a lot of adoption among pretty much everyone in our more on the data journalism side, but I've been using it more and more. And then on the business intelligence side, there's kind of a lot of different tools, both in Amazon and Google Cloud. And then software, there's tons of different software. Again, Tableau, you'll notice Tableau comes up a lot. This is kind of my day-to-day. I spend a lot of time both in Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud. It's probably the biggest tool that's like prevalent in the industry, and especially S3. I mean, you guys are all into data. I'm sure you've spent some time with it, but like having mastery of how to use S3, all the little nuances of it, what clients to use, knowing how to use Bodo if you're using Python or using all these different libraries. Super important. The more kind of the industry grows, I think the better mastery you have of those tools, the better. And then on the data engineering side, there's kind of a lot of different custom tools, but in industry, there's a lot of this just kind of nuanced work. For instance, at the LA Times, we have so many different legacy systems, and the more I've kind of gotten into it, I think the more you should rely on actual sort of these graphical tools to build workflows, or these tools like something I'm a big user of now is an open source tool called Airflow, which is really good Python open source library and kind of framework for running sort of jobs, any sort of like distributed tasks that you want to run. And then data science. This is probably more everyone here's wheelhouse. Jupyter, Databricks, Zeppelin, Spark. It's kind of the go-tos in the industry. Most companies, the last 3 companies I've worked for, use some combination of these 4 or of at least a couple of these. So I think if anyone's wanting to spend time learning tools that are actually used in production in a lot of different companies, I would urge everyone to spend a lot of time on that. And then data warehouses. We're actually a big user of Redshift Spectrum in Amazon, which I like a lot. Yeah, my talk's super short, but I kind of wanted to open it up to questions about just in general. I'd love for people to ask questions, maybe either about the LA Times, about media in general, or maybe about like their data career. If anyone questions? Yes?
My organization is working with the Department of Education to solve the student loan program.
Mm-hmm.
And we're analyzing the data that's stored at the University of California
Mm-hmm.
to look at anomalies, determine whether or not if they're gaming the system in terms of administrating the federal student loan program by giving preferences to non-residential students
Mm-hmm.
for the purposes of supplementing their shortfall in the state budget. So my question is this, is that in the LA Times,
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that you're pointing the source of the high student loan increase related working on data that points it to a proposition.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote an opinion piece, but it didn't get published. That's my question.
Okay, so you want me to publish your piece? It sounds super interesting. I will say I'm not a journalist. I'm more on the product side. I will say it's funny enough that you brought that up because I'm actually advising a company to deal with student loan debt who someone I'd love for you to talk to afterwards. But on that, it's funny. I email our editor all the time. He responds to emails like immediately. I sent him a subject line like, when are we doing this? Blah 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 blah, and he responded like in a minute and a half. So, email our editor. I'm sure you'll get a response. You did, no response. Well, I think I know who you could talk to, so we can talk after. More questions? Yes.
I wonder, where do you see Azure being sent? I don't see it mentioned on your slide. Microsoft Azure, do you see what sort of adoption have you seen?
So the question's on Azure. You're asking where do I see Azure and where does it fit?
From your experience,
Sure. I briefly worked for a company that was using Azure. I find outside of companies that are mainly C# and like Microsoft shops, there's not a huge adoption of Azure. However, Azure is pretty compelling. I think doesn't really compete on the data science front, with the exception of some of their machine learning APIs. But I think Google and Amazon are winning that space. But it's actually been about a year and a half since I've even spent a lot of time in Azure, so I don't think I'm qualified to really give a trend in the industry to where that's going. But in general, I think the competition is really good within the cloud computing space. I think I was worried a couple of years ago. It seemed like Amazon was really dominating the space, and both the strong competition from Google Cloud and Azure is really good. The thing that I would like to see, and I think is on all of us, especially as individual contributors, is to push these companies to standardize on open source tools. I've just noticed that over the past few years, more and more companies are becoming directly wedded to Amazon or Google, and I think that's ultimately a bad thing, especially for the open web and for privacy and for a lot of reasons, right? Maybe our government goes tyrannical. It's probably a bad idea. That all of our data is in Google servers. It's in NSA data warehouses, but that's a whole nother conversation. Anyway.
So this is kind of a meta question. Documentation is the bane of my existence.
Uh-huh.
Is there best practices you would recommend, like where to put it, how to curate it?
Sure, yeah. So anytime I've started a new project, in the last 3 companies I've worked for, before you even write a single line of code, I think a best practice is to start with the README. It's the first thing I do, other than create a new folder, CD into it, maybe git init, first commit, readme.md, write out what your file is, and even before, there's sort of software engineers who are in the test-driven development or some sort of feedback loop there. I'm sort of the README-driven development. Write the README first, and then as far as when projects become super big, I think the best practice is always to defer to what the best practice is in the community. So with Python, it's you got to have your docs and Sphinx, or if you're open source thing, maybe it's GitHub pages. I think go towards, look at the top projects in that language and then follow those standards. I think because the more familiar someone, just imagine someone coming into your shoes and inheriting the project, the more conventions that you follow, the better. So that's my general conception.
So where do you go about finding data sets? Is it like public data sets to publish a story, or?
Yeah, on the journal, again, I'll preface this because I'm not a journalist, but I do spend a lot of time advising a lot of the people on our data desk, data journalism folks. Is there's so much public data, especially if you're new to data scientists. I mean, you can just see so much data from census. Now, the issue I think with a lot of these like publicly available data sets is that they come in a lot of different shapes and formats. The federal government or the state governments aren't very good. They have a sort of obligation to provide this data, but it's often not very clean. Actually, Ben Welsh, who's the head of the data desk, wrote a automated bot, or I can't remember if he wrote it or he's like a big contributor on it. It's like for the Freedom of Information Act. It's called FOIA. It's like a sort of a legal vehicle to get any sort of data out of the government. They actually wrote a bot to automate the serving of these emails and like in whatever the legal format that's stipulated for that. And I think there's a company that is sort of built around that. So all these data sets are, somewhere online, maybe provided on some server. For instance, I was actually digging into this with one of my coworkers, but like the IRS provides like a lot of data about public companies, and a lot of times they've been doing investigations into sort of the relationships between different companies, and all of that available data is like in a very messy format, and it's like I think it's a common theme in the industry, both on like the product techie side, maybe in data journalism too, and just in the real world. There's so much data that is like very messy, and I've, among the data journalists, like 30 to 40% of their jobs is like writing all of this infrastructure to deal with it. Like one of my coworkers built a thing called QuakeBot, which actually auto publishes a story based on a API request from, or I'm not actually the one who works on it, so I don't know the technical details, but essentially there's like a government system that publishes when an earthquake happens. And that whole kind of pipeline is very messy and like prone to errors. Actually, when the Ridgecrest earthquake happened a couple of weeks ago, it's very interesting to see, but if you look at all those feeds, you can see anytime a computer generates something, and then like at 9 a.m. the next day, like there's a bunch of manual edits to all the earthquake data, because they'll like revise it because a seismologist will look at it. So anyway, I went on a long rant, but there's so much public data that's out there, especially if like you just want to learn or you want to build something, or maybe you're super passionate about solving a problem, whatever that is. I just go and find it. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask you what kind of problems that you try to solve in your role at the time facing?
My day-to-day is mostly focused on really building modern infrastructure, modern tech infrastructure for a very old company. So that's everywhere from how we communicate to our readers, the product experience itself. Our teams have been focused on changing how our company thinks about its business model, and that's pretty fundamental questions. It requires a lot of analysis into our data, and I think there's one person in here can attest to the challenge of that. But there's my real focus is on building all that infrastructure to make that happen. Mainly because I really care about journalism. I think in this age it's super important. So that's on like how we reach our subscribers, right? And like, you know, our paywall is super annoying, and like our last company or parent company decided to like, you know, not allow the readers of our paper to use incognito browser because like they're literally too dumb or lazy to like hire the engineer to implement it correctly. It's just like a laundry list of problems that we're trying to solve. But we're hiring if anyone's super passionate about. I know I'm making it sound not fun. So, but I will say there's a lot of fun parts of our job. I work with some of the smartest people. I would say the smartest people in the world. My boss built the data science teams at Netflix and Google and YouTube, and like super fun guy. And there's lots of really interesting problems too that we're tackling. So.
I saw like a lot of stacks on your slides. Have you ever used Qball by any chance?
No, I haven't. No.
That doesn't answer my question. Do I get to have another one?
Sure. Keep them rolling.
I am a subscriber of Electrons and the app.
Uh-huh. How do you like the new app? Sorry, I didn't want.
It sucks. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't work on it. So, no.
I'm sorry. I can show you like a lot of articles don't even show up the titles.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's beyond the point.
Yeah. Anyway.
I like the journalism behind it. It's just I think the app
I
is
agree.
little work.
I agree.
I guess my question is, every time I go online, there are paywalls. Like if I send an article that I find to a coworker, for instance, to read, there's a paywall. So if you guys relied on ads all your life, right? The magazine.
Mm-hmm.
How is it different now that you need a paywall and you need all these things? Can't you just like continue with the ads?
The difference is the fact that our company did not invest in those technologies 10 years ago. And essentially, there is a giant middleman called Google, who you may have heard of them. That they're essentially, and Google is essentially a vertically integrated company that captures a huge amount of the profit in the ad industry, both on YouTube and both through Google Ad Manager and through AdWords and other ad products of theirs. So on the advertising side, the reason our company has been pivoting to more of a subscription model has been for that reason, that there's diminishing returns on that. And I will counter, actually, my last company I came from ad tech, so I know quite a lot about it, but my last company was mainly focused on the video space because banner ads are like a dime a dozen, and all of the companies in that space, you know, are already reaping the profits. However, on the video side, we don't produce enough video content, and video ads actually make a fair amount of money. So that's a fair point. And also, before going to someone else, but on the paywall thing, something that my team's really focused on, I really care about, is both improving the paywall experience and actually building a productized version of a dynamic paywall. So say you share your article with your friends, right? They're not likely to become a subscriber until they actually develop a habit, right? Until you actually, you start reading, you read a couple times a month and then start reading more and more. So something a data scientist on our team had been spending a lot of time on is building a model to understand when people were likely to convert. And those are the people who should paywall, right? It's like, oh, you've been reading every day for like past 2 weeks, or you read, you just spent like 2 hours reading all this content, like then we're gonna show you a hard paywall. And then from then on, we're gonna be smart about it. That's something that, like, my team's really focused on, and some of the stuff right now is just getting to that point and undoing a lot of disinvestment in our company. But.
So, doing analytics work and like
Mm-hmm.
maybe 50 of those, it's like, well, that was interesting, you throw them away. The other 50, actually, you go from the proof of concept to operationalizing them, deploying them in the
Mm-hmm.
pipeline. But I have to think, though, at a place like the Los Angeles Times, a large proportion of what you're doing is more for a particular story or for a particular thing. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm curious about this.
Mm-hmm.
What proportion of the questions or the analysis that you do that are maybe, or your team does that are maybe more one-off, actually subsequently like, oh, we need to schedule this and run this in a more ongoing basis, and you have to go through that operationalization?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, really early on in the development of a lot of our analyses, there were just kind of one-off giant SQL queries. Maybe there was some sort of model that was being trained based on a lot of data, and it was a one-off in someone's Jupyter notebook, and Jesse wrote a lot of those. That was essentially my job, is to take a lot of that work and kind of build a pipeline for that. So there's kind of, I think in the data science and data analytics realm, there's that entire pipeline of tooling, of like notebooks where you're just like, working on a problem, and then actually taking that into a production system. That's actually why the past month we've been starting to integrate Databricks, just because giving data scientists the ability to like have more control over that pipeline is pretty important. I think over a year or two ago, or as these tools mature, that like idea, model, some test code to like, a Docker container to a repeatable like system is kind of gonna start to coalesce into some common tools. There's a lot of different tools right now for that, which I think is it's kind of the biggest challenge of my job, or at least it has been in the past, has been, I would say the biggest tool that has been a huge help, which I urge everyone in this room to learn, is Docker. If you don't know how to use Docker, you're going to miss out, because every company I've worked for is a huge adopter of it, and it makes the engineering and like productionizing side of it a lot easier, just because like having a virtualization system really helps. So learn Docker, long, short answer. Anyway, thanks for coming. That's that.